Pre-Code Horror and Sci-Fi Comics, Weird Mysteries, Volume 1 by PS Artbooks. Greetings, friends. Today we are looking at Volume 1 of Weird Mysteries, the Stanley Morse comic book that was originally published in 1952 to 1954 by Stanley Morse. On the back of the slipcover, we see all 6 issues represented in this volume. All covers done by the awe-inspiring Bernard Bailey. On the cover, we see Volume 1 of Weird Mysteries, October 1952 to August-September of 1953, covering issues 1 through 6, with a foreword by James Heath Lantz. Here's the front end paper artwork by Tony Mortillaro. Fantastic. I just love it. The story is great too. Check out this black cat. Contents page, the foreword by Lantz, and of course all 6 issues. That fantastic original art by Bernard Bailey for issue number 4 of Weird Mysteries. And here is the introduction by James Heath Lantz. Now, I was in correspondence with Mr. Lantz, and he sent me some more information on his background working with PS Artbooks, and I quote, "I started out volunteering articles for various websites and fanzines. My first paid gig was an essay co-authored with legendary comic scribe Roy Thomas in Roy Thomas Presents Captain Video, published by PS Artbooks in April of 2012. The summer of that year, I wrote PS Artbooks editor Peter Crowther to discuss Dell's Outer Limits and Twilight Zone comics and asked if he needed something for any books they were working on. He asked if I'd be willing to write the introduction for Pre-Code Classics, Weird Mysteries Volume 1. I said yes, and was then assigned the second volume and Roy Thomas Presents Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, Volume 3. I just loved the title, Weird Mysteries, and felt it was right up my alley. The thing I loved most about working on Weird Mysteries was the freedom PS Artbooks gave me. I don't recall being given any editorial direction, a word count, or anything like that. I did the research, read the comics, started writing, and tapped into the horror fan in me." Peter Crowther apparently liked what he read, because the published version is pretty much what I sent him, with typos corrected. And so here is the introduction by James Heath Lantz. And as you can see, it says, "Dare you read this introduction?" Perhaps "dare I write this introduction" should be the proper question. Strange creatures tormenting people, severed heads, a brain being removed from a corpse, an insect with a human face exiting from a skull. And those are just the covers drawn by Basil Wolverton and Bernard Bailey. It could also be every time my wife and I encounter our neighbors or my Christmas list, but I digress. Starts talking about the various issues and, of course, the background, a bit of background on the controversy generated by the pre-code comics, horror comics, and crime comics. And, of course, the Senate hearings and the Comics Code Authority. And here we go with Weird Mysteries number 1, October of 1952. Artists in this issue include Hy Fleischman, Frank Frollo, Nick Frank, Lafredo, and Walter Palace with Mike Esposito. Basil Wolverton is primarily credited for this cover, although apparently there were 2 artists involved. So what you'll notice as we go through this comic book, Weird Mysteries number 1 from 1952, is that all the stories in this issue were reprinted in Weird Tales of the Future number 8 in 1953. And here's the first story, High Voltage by Hy Fleischman. And The Planet Eaters, with art by Frank Frollo, was also eventually reprinted in the 1953 issue of Weird Tales of the Future, number 8. A Stone's Throw from Eternity, art by Lafredo. And of course, The Spirits from Outer Space, with art by Walter Palace and Mike Esposito doing the inks on this. As I said in the other video on Weird Tales of the Future number 8, love the splash page. I just love the, space stuff that Palace does, and of course Esposito with the inks. I think they do a fine job. Nice ad here for Harvey Horrors. You can go to harveyhorrors.com, of course by PS Artbooks. They're reprints. I've got several in soft cover of the Harvey volumes. This brings us to Weird Mysteries number 2. One of my favorite Weird Mysteries covers, naturally by the fantastic Bernard Bailey. A phantasmagorical cover for this December of 1952 issue. In this issue, as we can see, we have Hy Fleischman returning. We also have Basil Wolverton coming in with Robot Woman. Turnabout by Charles Stern. First Come, First Served by Tony Mortallaro. And Ordeal by Wax by Charles Stern. Here we go with some Hy Fleischman, The Devil's Bottles. 50 combat action plastic toys for $1. Yes, there you go. Free 6-inch long die-cut shooting cannon. Robot Woman by Basil Wolverton. It is such a great story. A classic. You've probably seen this. It's been reprinted in various publications. And it's just a great one. The scientist, who is just hideous, basically, he longs for a woman that will be able to tolerate his hideous appearance. Of course, he makes a robot woman. I've done it. I've created a woman of my own. With, of course, some unfortunate drawbacks, as the robot woman becomes very, very enamored with her creator, and he starts getting pissed off, and he smacks the robot, ends up knocking her into some acid, a vat of acid or something. So the next time he sees her, she is just completely melting, and she says, "You are the only man I could ever love." And he's like, "Don't come near me. You're burned. You're horrible." Just love this Wolverton art. Such a great story. Great artist. He did some fantastic pre-code, folks. She kind of comes after him, and he also gets splattered with acid. Then a thief shows up to rob the place, and he goes into the basement and discovers the woman. And he's like, "Get me the hell out of here." While she's saying, "This is the only man I could ever love. You leave him alone or I kill." The end. An extremely basic Twilight Zone themed kind of story called Turnabout, with art by Charles Stern. So these guys are on a planet, and for some reason they're playing with ants, kind of tormenting the ants. So they find these giant holes on the planet, and the guy's like, "Hey, I wonder what those holes are for." The other guy's like, "Hey, they might be ants, but wow, think of the size of those." Bizarre monster ants that immediately attack the spacemen, start killing them. And then the ant monster traps these two guys inside of a hole. It turns out that the ant is just tormenting them, playing with them as they played with the little ants. Excellent story by Tony Mortallaro. First come, first served. Again, fantastic splash panel here by Mortallaro. Highly recommended. Mortallaro is one of those cats that had a really unique style. And here we have Ordeal by Wax, and once again this is Charles Stern. Oh yes, new figure mold, French waist. And here's a full page ad for Golden Age classic titles from Roy Thomas Presents, psartbooks.com.